On February 27, 1996, Pokemon Red and Green were released in Japan, kicking off a now 20-year franchise consisting of multiple games, anime, manga, and pretty much anything else you can merchandise. The Pokemon franchise has been one of my favorite video game franchises and one of the very first games I've ever played. I feel like I have to celebrate this 20th anniversary somehow. Well, I'm already writing a series which is retelling one of the best Pokemon manga, as well as combining it with one of the spin-off games, and I'm already doing a Nuzlocke marathon to cover the games. Well, that only leaves the anime for me to talk about, and considering it's one of the first anime I've ever seen, I feel like I have to talk about it some way. But talking about the anime itself would take too long. But I could talk about it in snippets by just talking about the anime movies. The Pokemon movies somehow still found themselves somewhat relevant even today. Even if you stop watching anime, you still pay attention to when the movie comes out, because when the movie comes out, there's a good chance that when the next game will come out, when there's a good chance the next special thing will come out. So you still pay a bit of attention to the movies no matter what you do. So let's just talk about the movies as movies. Starting of course with the very first Pokemon movie, Pokemon the First Movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back. Originally premiering in Japan on July 18th, 1998, and then in America a year later on November 10th, 1999. My god, it's been over a decade since this movie, and I remember when it was fresh in theater, back when Pokemon movies were in the theater. Seriously, does anyone else remember this? Like the Burger King campaign and all that stuff? They wanted you to make sure this was a big deal. This was Pokemon's first movie and they wanted you to know it was happening. Anyway, enough about that, let's get on to the movie itself. Our movie begins with Dr. Fuji, a guy named after a character in the video games who was only notable for getting kidnapped. And yet we somehow keep coming back to his character. Anyway, he's on a quest to uncover the secrets of Pokemon cloning, and he pretty much sells himself to Giovanni under the deal that he'll create an enhanced clone of Mew. They managed to find some DNA from an old fossil and recreate it into Mewtwo, the world's most powerful Pokemon. A statement that is truer than it's ever been. Mega Mewtwo X and Y are some of the strongest Pokemon to exist in the entire franchise. They have better stats than Arceus, who I remind you is God. Anyway, decided to celebrate Mewtwo's birth, which for some reason, I'll get to that later, pisses off Mewtwo, who proceeds to massacre the entire team of scientists and destroy the building. This was dubbed by 4Kids, right? The guys who censored out anything that might even be considered too violent. Like they banned the entire episode over guns and yet they leave in the whole murder all the scientists plotline? Or were they all sent to the Shadow Realm? I honestly don't know. Anyway, Giovanni appears conveniently in order to offer Mewtwo a partnership. Mewtwo agrees, and after getting some rather awesome armor which does something, restrain his psychic powers, so this counts as like Goku's weighted armor in Dragon Ball, I don't know. Mewtwo joins up with Giovanni and does various errands for Team Rocket, and after a montage, which I've heard takes place in the span of 2 weeks, I'm not exactly sure, Giovanni, for some reason, tells Mewtwo he's just a tool. I mean, Giovanni pretty much have Mewtwo fooled at this point. He thinks you're his partner, and yet you tell him you're just a tool to be used by me. After your creation, you're nothing more than a tool. So a Pokemon that you personally know cannot be stopped by anything you have. That's why you had to trick him. Did you think you could throw the Master Ball at him right quick? Because I don't think you have that on you right now. Mewtwo decides to say screw you and returns to the island he was born on, which is dubbed New Island, and then decides he's going to take over the world because people are a-holes. Sometime later, we reconnect with our main characters of Ash, Misty, and Brock as they're sitting down and enjoying a nice picnic on a sunny day, with Team Rocket stalking them from the hilltops. And then a random trainer shows up to challenge Ash to a battle just in time for the opening song. Get used to this, people. In pretty much every movie, the opening song starts around this point, and it is always a battle montage between Ash and some random trainer he's fighting. As Ash fights, a mysterious figure watches the battle and, impressed with Ash, sends him an invitation to head to New Island to battle the strongest trainer in the world, apparently. Team Rocket also intercepts the letter by also stopping Dragonite with a frying pan, which is actually an impressive feat for them, and also help to New Island. Unfortunately, there's a superstorm in the way for Ash and a whole bunch of other trainers, but a bunch of them manage to brave the storm using their Pokemon. Ash and friends have to use a Viking boat, which is being piloted by, obviously, Team Rocket, leading to quite possibly one of the most weird/funny jokes in the entire movie, if not all of these movies. Ash and friends manage to arrive, Team Rocket sneaks in, and are quickly followed by Mew, and Ash meets the other Pokemon trainers, in a let's quickly establish our characters so you can put a name to the face kind of thing. Anyway, Mewtwo descends and reveals himself to the other trainers. demonstrating his amazingly OP psychic powers. Meanwhile, Team Rocket hides around the place trying to find a way to find Ash and friends before discovering a laboratory, in which they accidentally start the opening exposition all over again, at the same time activating a machine which steals a few hairs off Meowth's tail and creates a clone of him. Meanwhile, up above, Mewtwo shows off his clone Charizard, Venusaur, and Blastoise, fighting off against 3 trainers and their original counterparts, managing to win each and every fight because OP clones. After the fight, Mewtwo decides that the originals are worthless, creating clone Pokeballs in order to capture all the Pokemon in one hit. They manage to capture all of them except for Togepi, who Misty hides in her bag, and Pikachu, who Ash tries his best to protect. Unfortunately, before long, Pikachu ends up captured and Ash chases the Pokeball of Pikachu inside of it down to the laboratory, where he manages to wreck the machine as soon as it creates a Pikachu clone. Up above, Mewtwo shows off his clone army and pretty much declares he's going to eliminate the world, including every Pokemon except for Clone. But before long, Ash rides with the originals and tries fighting Mewtwo in a fist fight, but OP Psychic-type Pokemon versus 10-year-old child with the strength of a 10-year-old child. So Ash almost gets himself killed before Mewtwo comes in and makes the save. Mewtwo decides to show off his true power by challenging Mew to a fight, after which Mew says everyone has the right to live in peace, blah blah blah, peace, harmony, and all that. But in the original Japanese, Mew outright says the clones are abominations and have to be destroyed. Think about that for a minute. Everyone fights, clone versus originals, and all the trainers look horrified because the fights are apparently so brutal, because all the Pokemon can't use their special attacks, which is kind of weird because these are supposed to be their natural abilities. But anyway, everybody fights, everyone's horrified, Pikachu refuses to fight, and gets beat up by his clone, Meowth. At the same time, Meowth philosophizes with his surprisingly mellow clone. Anyway, it all ends with Ash charging in between Mew and Mewtwo's final attacks, dying and turning to stone before everyone cries to bring back to life. Mewtwo learns a lesson, and then mind wipes everyone else who immediately forget their lesson. So, making the entire movie kind of pointless in the end, huh, Mewtwo? So yeah, with that said, I think this movie is very middle of the road overall. It's not a great movie, but certainly not a bad movie. Hell, it's not even the worst of the Pokemon movies. It's very middle of the road in that sense. The main issues with it are that message, and well, that message is the main issue. It seems to go against the entire point of the series, as Pokemon training is essentially fighting with Pokemon, which is your 9-to-5 job. So if you believe it's wrong, then how do you do your job? This and the next movie will have some issues that seem to go against the very point of the series, but we'll talk about that issue when we get to that movie. As for this message in this movie, it's going against everything about the series, so we'll just ignore it and move on from there. Another thing is, Ash and friends are very tertiary to the overall plot, which is understandable because it's not their story. It's Mewtwo's story. I know that seems obvious, but Ash and friends are very much just the viewpoint characters for us, the audience. They're the characters we're familiar with, so we'll follow them. But it's Mewtwo's story about his character growth and evolution throughout the course of the movie. It's his lesson to learn, and the mind wipe is kind of stupid in the end, but still it's his lesson to learn, so everyone else doesn't need to learn the lesson. But there's one thing about Mewtwo I'm still confused about. Why did he flip out in the very beginning and kill all the scientists? Well, that's interesting because there's actually a special mini anime short created that actually explains that. It was something added on to the DVD and VHS release of the movie, but not part of the original theatrical cut, which is why most people haven't seen it if you didn't look on the internet for it. It's called, in Japan, The Uncut Story of Mewtwo, or for us Americans, it's known as The Story of Mewtwo's Origins. We begin with Dr. Fuji explaining why he's so dead set on creating clone. As it turns out, he's trying to recreate his dead daughter, Amber, which is why he sold himself to Giovanni, because he needs the funding from him. Again, under pretense he creates Mewtwo. Anyway, they manage to find a DNA to create Mew in the jungle, and then proceed to create the rather adorable looking immature version of Mewtwo. He's alongside a number of clones of the Kanto starters Charmander, Bulbasaur, and Squirtle, as well as another clone, Amber 2, the clone of the original Amber. The clones aren't necessarily conscious, but are able to communicate with each other via telepathy in this kind of clone void area, in which they all discuss life, the universe, and everything from the view of a child. Mewtwo and the other clones are very curious about everything, and Amber, with somehow memories of her previous life, pretty much tries to explain everything to the younger clones. Of course, however, all the clones start dying one by one, and Mewtwo comes face to face with the idea of death. Of course, Amber also starts dying, and in her last words, she thanks Mewtwo for caring about her and tells him to live a full life, a wonderful full life. Mewtwo, of course, freaks out considering all his friends are dead and almost dies, but the scientists manage to mind wipe him. The mind wiping doesn't necessarily work as Mewtwo holds onto his memories, but falls into a deep slumber because of the drug. He sleeps pondering Amber 2's last words to him, live a wonderful life. I guess this can be used to explain Mewtwo's motivations. With the idea of living a wonderful life in his head, probably developed the idea he shouldn't be used as a tool by people. But ever since waking up, people have only wanted to use him as a tool. He reacted violently and just believed that since everyone's an a-hole, might as well just destroy the world. An understandable statement, nonetheless. I mean, a bit of an extreme, but still understandable. Overall, I have to say this movie is still pretty good. Not the best yet again, but certainly not the worst. And an enjoyable watch, especially for a Pokemon fan. Well, only if you're a Pokemon fan. Everyone else will find this movie rather infuriating. So, yeah, pretty good movie, pretty fun story. See you at the next movie, Pokemon the Movie 2000. I'm gonna be honest here, I don't like that title.